Howdy, folks, and pull up a seat to the campfire here at Grit and Gunsmoke. The West was forged by loud noises, blast of dynamite, the roar of a train, the thunder of a dozen Colt revolvers. But the stories that last, the ones that get whispered when the fire burns low, they're often about the quiet men, the ones who move like ghosts and speak in silences. Before we follow one such man into the heart of a town rotten with corruption, do this old storyteller a favor, hit that subscribe button and ring that bell, so you don't miss the storm that's brewing. Now, listen close. This is the story of Mesa Verde, and the quietest gunshot it ever heard. The wind in Mesa Verde had a personality. It was a mean, scouring thing, born in the vast, sun-bleached emptiness of the Arizona desert. It carried more dust than a stampede and whispered through the cracked timbers of the town like a restless spirit. It was the first and last thing you noticed about the place. The man who rode in on a tired-looking bay gelding seemed to be a part of that wind. He was all dust and silence. His clothes were the color of the trail, his face was obscured by the shadow of a low-brimmed hat, and his eyes, when they briefly caught the light, were a flat, noncommittal gray. He moved with a deep, bone-weary stillness, as if every motion was a carefully considered expense. On his hip, worn low and tied down, was a single, old-model Remington revolver, its metal worn smooth, its grip dark with age and use. His name was Cole Walker, but he hadn't offered it to anyone. He was a man traveling with a ghost, and ghosts don't have names. The ghost's name was Ethan, his brother. The last letter Cole had received from Ethan, 6 months ago, had been full of a nervous energy. He'd written of a mining claim near a small town called Mesa Verde, of trouble with a local gambling boss, of a feeling of being watched. Then, the letters had stopped. A quiet man himself, Cole had waited, but the silence had grown, becoming a heavy, ominous thing. Now, he was here to find its source. He rode down the town's single, sad street. Mesa Verde was a place that had given up. The buildings sagged, their signs faded by a relentless sun. The faces of the few people he saw were averted, their shoulders hunched, their steps hurried. This was not a community, it was a collection of prisoners sharing a yard. He saw the source of the fear soon enough. A group of 4 men swaggered out of the saloon, the Gilded Spade. They walked with the proprietary air of wolves in a chicken coop. Each man wore a black vest, and pinned to the lapel was a small, silver pin in the shape of a playing card jack of spades. The blackjackers. Their laughter was loud and abrasive, an ugly sound in the quiet, fearful air. Cole dismounted in front of the livery, the only place in town that looked even remotely cared for. An old man with a face like a dried creek bed emerged, wiping his hands on an oily rag. "A stall for the horse," Cole said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp, and used to conversation. "A good rub-down. He's come a long way." The old man nodded, not meeting his eyes. "Just passing through?" he asked, his voice a dry whisper. "Looking for someone," Cole replied. "My brother, Ethan Walker. Tall, fair-haired. Maybe you've seen him." The old man's hand stilled for a fraction of a second. A flicker of something fear, recognition passed through his eyes before being extinguished. "Don't know the name," he lied, his gaze fixed on the horse's flank. "Lots of men pass through Mesa Verde. Most don't stay long." It was the first lie, the first closed door. Cole knew he was in the right place. He left the livery and walked toward the saloon. He needed information, and a saloon was a river of whispers, if you knew how to listen. The Gilded Spade was the heart of the town's rottenness. The air inside was thick with the smell of stale beer, and washed bodies, and cheap perfume. It was dark and crowded, but the noise was joyless. It was the sound of men losing money they couldn't afford to lose. At a large table in the back, a man held court. He was impeccably dressed in a black brocade vest and a pristine white shirt. A diamond stickpin glittered in his cravat. His hair was slicked back, and his face was handsome in a sharp, predatory way. He dealt cards with a fluid, mesmerizing grace. This was Black Jack Jacoby, the owner of the saloon and the undisputed king of Mesa Verde. And surrounding him, like loyal hounds, were the ranking members of his gang. Cole took a seat at the bar, ordered a whiskey, and became a part of the shadows. He was a hunter, and he understood the value of patience. He listened. He heard the muttered complaints of miners who had lost their claims at Jacoby's poker table. He heard the casual cruelty in the way the blackjackers spoke to the saloon girls. He saw the town's sheriff, a man with a food-stained vest and a hopeless expression, share a drink with one of the very men wearing the silver jack of spades. He was nursing his drink when the saloon doors opened and an old man entered, his face etched with worry. He had the clean, antiseptic smell of a doctor about him. He made a beeline for the bar. "Evening, Doc," the bartender said, his voice low. "Barkeep," the doctor replied, his own voice tired but firm. "I need to speak with Mr. Jacoby." One of the blackjackers, a burly man with a broken nose, blocked his path. "The boss is busy. Get lost." "One of my patients," the doctor said, his gaze unwavering, a young miner, was brought in an hour ago. He was beaten half to death. He said your men did it because he couldn't pay his gambling debt. I'm here for that debt. I'll pay it. Blackjack Jacoby looked up from his card game, a slow, cold smile spreading across his face. He gestured for his men to let the doctor approach. "Doctor Alistair," Jacoby said, his voice smooth as silk and cold as a snake's belly. "Always the good Samaritan. You should know by now, doctor, that kindness is a disease in a town like this. And I am the cure." "The boy is just 16, Jacoby," the doctor insisted. "He has nothing." "He had a debt," Jacoby said, his smile vanishing. "And in my town, debts are always paid. In coin or in blood." He turned his cold gaze on the doctor. "And now you have a debt as well. The debt of interfering. My associate, Mr. Vance here," he gestured to the man with the broken nose, "will escort you back to your office and collect a medical supply tax for the trouble you've caused." The doctor's face went pale, but he stood his ground, a lone pillar of decency in a sea of corruption. It was in that moment that Cole Walker moved. He didn't say a word. He didn't draw his gun. He simply stood up from his stool at the bar and began to walk slowly, deliberately, toward the doctor and the hulking Mr. Vance. His movement was so quiet, so devoid of aggression, that it was a moment before anyone registered it. Vance, seeing the dusty stranger approaching, turned. "This ain't your concern, friend. Move along." Cole didn't stop. He walked right up to the man, his gray eyes as flat and lifeless as a dead winter sky. The sheer, unnerving stillness of him, the absolute lack of fear, seemed to throw the larger man off balance. Cole stopped, inches from him. "The doctor is leaving," Cole said, his voice a low, quiet rumble. It was not a request. Vance, his authority challenged, sneered. "And who the hell are you two?" He never finished the sentence. Cole's hand moved, not with the speed of a gunfighter, but with the brutal efficiency of a wartime killer. It wasn't a punch. It was a perfectly placed palm heel strike to the man's solar plexus. The air left Vance's lungs in a great, whooshing gasp. He doubled over, his face a mask of shocked agony, unable to breathe, unable to move. The saloon fell into a stunned silence. Every eye was on the quiet stranger. Blackjack Jacoby's hand froze over his cards, his eyes narrowing with a look of cold, calculating interest. Cole turned his flat, gray gaze on the doctor. "Go home, Doc," he said quietly. The doctor, his own face a mixture of shock and a dawning, fearful gratitude, hesitated for a second, then nodded and quickly left the saloon. Cole looked down at the gasping, choking man on the floor. Then he looked up, his gaze sweeping over the other blackjackers, who were now on their feet, their hands on their guns. Finally, his eyes met Blackjack Jacoby's across the room. He didn't offer a threat. He didn't make a grand statement. He simply held the man's gaze for a long, silent moment. Then, he turned his back on all of them and walked out of the saloon as quietly as he had entered, melting back into the dusty, windswept night. He had not found his brother, but he had found the men responsible for the fear in Ethan's last letter. He had arrived in Mesa Verde in silence, looking for answers. But with a single, quiet act of defiance, he had just asked a question of his own. And he knew, with a cold, grim certainty, that the answer would come in a hail of gunfire. The search was over. The hunt had just begun. Cole Walker's quiet defiance in the gilded spade was a stone dropped into a stagnant, scummy pond. The ripples spread instantly. He had not drawn a gun, had not thrown a punch in the traditional sense, but he had done something far more dangerous. He had challenged the authority of the blackjackers and walked away untouched. He was no longer an invisible drifter. He was now a man marked, a puzzle to be solved. He used this newfound visibility as a tool. He knew they would be watching him, so he gave them something to watch. He returned to the saloon the next day, not to drink, but to listen. He sat at the same corner table, a silent, brooding presence that unnerved the other patrons and irritated the gang members. He was a stone in their shoe, a quiet declaration that he was not afraid, and he was not leaving. His first breakthrough came not from the outlaws, but from the one man in town who still clung to a shred of decency. Dr. Alistair, his face a mixture of gratitude and profound worry, sought him out. He didn't approach Cole in the saloon, but waited for him in the quiet twilight hours near the livery. "That was a foolish thing you did, son," the doctor said, his voice a low, concerned whisper. "But I thank you for it. No one has stood up to Jacoby in years." "I'm not here to stand up to anyone," Cole replied, his voice a gravelly rasp. "I'm looking for my brother, Ethan Walker." The doctor sighed, a weary, defeated sound. "I was afraid of that," he said. "I knew Ethan. A good man, a bit hot-headed, but his heart was in the right place." He confirmed Cole's fears. Ethan had been in town. He had been working a small silver claim in the hills, and he had come into conflict with Jacoby. Ethan was a fair card player, the doctor explained. He saw what many of us have known for years. Jacoby's games at the Gilded Spade are crooked. He doesn't just win, he strips a man of everything he has. Ethan saw him cheat a young prospector out of his claim deed. He called Jacoby out on it, right in the middle of the saloon. The image was a stark contrast to the quiet, thoughtful brother Cole remembered. Ethan had been pushed to a point of open defiance. There was an argument, the doctor continued, his eyes darting into the shadows. A bad one. Jacoby didn't touch him then, not in public. But he has a way of settling his accounts in the dark. A week later, Ethan was gone. Vanished. No one had seen him since. The doctor's story was the confirmation Cole needed. Ethan hadn't just disappeared. He had been erased. Before he left, Dr. Alistair gave Cole a final, quiet piece of advice. "If you want to know what happens in the dark corners of this town, talk to the shadows themselves. Talk to Maria, at the saloon." Maria. Cole had noticed her. She was one of the saloon girls, but she moved with a quiet, weary grace that set her apart. She had the eyes of someone who had seen too much, a survivor who had learned to be invisible in plain sight. That night, Cole sought her out. He waited until her shift was over, until she was walking the lonely path to the small adobe house she shared with her elderly mother. He didn't sneak up on her. He simply appeared at the end of the alley, a tall, silent figure in the moonlight. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She simply stopped, her hand clutching the small bag she carried, her face a mask of weary resignation. "You're the quiet one," she said, her voice soft but not frightened. "The one who put Vance on the floor." "I need your help," Cole said, his voice direct. "My brother, Ethan. He's missing." "Doctor Alistair said you might know something." Maria looked at him, her gaze searching, assessing. She saw the deep, profound pain behind his stoic facade, a pain she recognized from the faces of 100 other broken men who had passed through the saloon. "Helping people in this town is a good way to get killed," she said, her voice flat. "They're already hunting me," Cole replied. "Knowing something is better than knowing nothing." Something in his quiet determination, and the raw, undisguised grief in his eyes, seemed to break through her wall of cynicism. "Ethan was a kind man," she whispered, her voice softening. "He used to bring my mother medicine from the doctor. He didn't deserve what happened." She agreed to help. She told him what she knew. The Blackjackers were more than just Jacoby's personal thugs. There was a clear hierarchy. Jacoby was the brain, the cold, calculating strategist. The brute, Vance, the man Cole had put down, was the muscle, the enforcer. And then there was the third man, the most dangerous of them all. His name was Reno, a slick, deadly gunslinger who was never far from Jacoby's side. He was Jacoby's personal bodyguard, his executioner. "If a man needs to disappear," Maria said, a shiver in her voice, "Reno is the one who makes it happen." Then she gave him the first tangible clue, the first thread he could pull. "After the argument, I heard them talking. Vance and another man. They were laughing. Vance said Jacoby was going to take Ethan out to the old Spectre mine to teach him some respect for the house rules. Ethan was never seen again. The Spectre mine. A name whispered like a curse in the territory, a place said to be haunted, a place where men went and never returned. It was a fitting place for a secret grave. Cole had his destination. He had the structure of his enemy. And he had his first, reluctant ally. The whispers in the saloon had given him a direction. Now, he had to see if the ghosts of the Spectre Mine would give him the truth. The Spectre Mine was a scar on the face of the desert, a place where the earth itself seemed to have died. The timbers of the headframe were skeletal against the sky, and the surrounding buildings an old SE office, a bunkhouse were collapsing into themselves, their windows like vacant, staring eyes. A profound and natural silence hung over the place, a silence that seemed to swallow sound. The local Apache believed the place was cursed, a gateway to the land of the dead. As Cole rode into the clearing, he could understand why. He was not a man given to superstition, but he was a man who trusted his instincts, and every instinct he had was screaming at him that he was riding into a trap. Maria's information was good, but it was also the kind of information that could have been deliberately leaked. Jacoby knew he was being hunted. This could be a cage, baited with the ghost of his brother. He dismounted a quarter-mile out, leaving his horse in a hidden ravine. He approached the mine on foot, moving with the quiet, deliberate patience of a soldier on a long-range reconnaissance patrol. He did not go straight for the main shaft. He circled the perimeter, his gray eyes scanning every shadow, every rock formation. He was reading the story the land was telling him. He found the first sign near the crumbling foundation of the old bunkhouse. A single, spent rifle cartridge, half buried in the dust. He picked it up. It was a .44 Winchester, but the brass was from a specific, high-quality military batch. It was from a Henry repeating rifle. Ethan's rifle. He continued his circle, his senses on high alert. He found the next sign near the entrance to the main adit, a series of scuff marks in the hard-packed earth, the clear sign of a struggle, of a body being dragged. And tangled in a thorny mesquite bush nearby was the final, damning piece of evidence, a small, torn scrap of blue fabric from a chambray shirt, the kind Ethan always wore. He was here. Ethan had been brought here, and he had fought. Cole knew, with an absolute certainty, that he was being watched. The trap was real. The silence was not the silence of abandonment, it was the silence of ambush. He did not retreat. To do so would be to show fear, to give them the advantage. Instead, he chose to spring their trap on his own terms. He walked deliberately out into the center of the clearing, toward the main mine shaft, making himself an open, undeniable target. The first shot came, as he had predicted, from a sniper hidden in the second-story window of the SE office. The bullet whined past his ear, close enough to feel the heat of its passage. Cole did not dive for cover. In the split second after the shot, he had already pinpointed the shooter's location. He drew his Remington, a single, fluid motion, and fired. He didn't aim to kill. He aimed for the wooden frame of the window. The heavy slug shattered the rotting wood, sending a shower of splinters into the sniper's face, blinding him for a crucial few seconds. The clearing erupted. For more blackjackers rose from behind rocks and overturned or carts, their pistols blazing. The ambush was sprung. But Cole was no longer in the open. The moment he fired, he had moved, diving behind a large, rusted boiler, the Outlaws' bullets sparking off the thick iron. This was his element. He was not a stand-up gunfighter. He was a tactician, a soldier. And they had made the mistake of engaging him on a battlefield full of cover and shadows. What followed was a brutal, one-sided lesson in guerrilla warfare. The blackjackers were thugs, used to intimidating unarmed miners. They were fighting a veteran of the war's bloodiest, most chaotic campaigns. Cole moved from cover to cover, a gray phantom in the dust and chaos. He used the crumbling buildings, the deep shadows, the very layout of the mine against them. His shots were not panicked, they were deliberate, each one aimed to wound, to disable, to sow confusion. He shot a man in the leg, sending him screaming to the ground. He ricocheted a bullet off an ore cart, the whining lead making another man duck and abandon his position. He became a ghost in their midst, his shots seeming to come from everywhere at once. The Outlaws, their confidence shattered, their plan in disarray, broke. One of them made a run for the horses. Cole's Remington roared once more, and the man fell, his flight cut short. The fight devolved into a hunt. He stalked the remaining men through the dark, decaying buildings. The Spectre Mine, once a place of industry, became a charnel house. The final confrontation was with the man in charge of the ambush, the brute, Vance. Cole cornered him in the dark, cavernous space of the main crushing room. Vance, a giant of a man, came at him not with a gun, but with a heavy miner's pick, swinging it like a medieval battle axe. The fight was short and savage. Cole, smaller and faster, dodged the wild swings, using his pistol not as a firearm, but as a club. He broke the man's wrist with a vicious blow, then brought the heavy barrel down on the side of his head. Vance collapsed in a heap, unconscious. Silence returned to the Spectre mine, broken only by the sound of the wind and Cole's own ragged breathing. He stood amidst the wreckage of the ambush, surrounded by the wounded and the dead. He did not kill Vance. A dead man could not carry a message. He tied the man's hands, propped him up against a support beam, and waited for him to regain consciousness. When the brute's eyes fluttered open, he found Cole Walker kneeling in front of him, his gray eyes as cold and empty as the mine itself. "Where is he?" Cole's voice was a low, dangerous whisper. "Where is my brother?" Vance, his head throbbing, his arm broken, just spat a mouthful of bloody defiance. Cole didn't flinch. He simply cocked the hammer of his Remington. "I'm not going to ask you again." The fear finally broke through the man's bravado. "He's dead," Vance grunted. Jacoby. He wanted to know what Ethan had told the marshal. They argued. Ethan fought back. It went wrong. Jacoby buried him out in the Badlands. A place with no name. It was the truth, or at least a part of it. A confirmation of his deepest fear. Cole looked at the man, a pathetic, broken instrument of a more cunning evil. "I'm letting you live," Cole said, his voice a dead, flat monotone. "You're going to crawl back to Mesa Verde. You're going to tell Jacoby what happened here today. You're going to tell him his mine is haunted. And you're going to tell him that I'm coming for him." He stood up, turned his back on the wounded man, and walked out of the mine, leaving Vance alone with the dead and the ghosts. The trap had been sprung, but the cage had broken. The hunter had become the hunted, and the prey had just bared its fangs. The return of Vance, battered, broken, and babbling about a ghost who moved like smoke and shot like a demon, sent a chill through the gilded spade that no amount of whiskey could warm. The story, told in terrified whispers, solidified Cole's new identity. He was no longer a man. He was a myth in the making, a specter haunting the edges of Jacoby's empire. Jacoby, a man who controlled his world through fear, now found that fear being used as a weapon against him. He posted more guards, his men grew jumpy and prone to drunken arguments, and the entire town held its breath, waiting for the ghost's next move. Cole knew that killing Jacoby's thugs one by one was a war of attrition he might not win. They were replaceable. To truly cripple the serpent, he had to attack its skeleton, the corrupt framework that gave it the illusion of legitimacy. His first target was not a gunman, but the tarnished silver star pinned to the chest of Sheriff Miller. Sheriff Miller was a man drowning in his own cowardice. Cole had watched him for days. He was a creature of pathetic, predictable routine, from his office to the saloon for his long liquid lunch, a stumbling walk back to his desk for a nap, and then back to the saloon for dinner and a night of cards with the very men he was sworn to police. He was not a lawman. He was a mascot for the town's corruption. Cole didn't want to kill him. A dead sheriff, no matter how useless, would bring in territorial marshals, a complication he did not need. He wanted to turn him. He wanted to take the law, however broken it was, and aim it back at its master. The hunt for leverage was a quiet, patient one. On a moonless night, Cole slipped into the sheriff's office. The lock was a joke, and the man himself was snoring in a drunken stupor in his back room. The office reeked of stale cigar smoke and failure. Cole moved with a ghostly silence, his eyes scanning the cluttered desk, the overflowing filing cabinets. He found it in a locked cash box hidden under a loose floorboard beneath the desk. It wasn't a stash of money. It was a small, leather-bound ledger. He lit a single match, the small flame a bubble of light in the oppressive dark. He flipped through the pages. It was all there, recorded in the sheriff's shaky, meticulous hand. A detailed accounting of every bribe, every payoff from Jacoby, dates, amounts, and the names of the blackjackers who had delivered the cash. It was a meticulous record of the sheriff's own damnation, a document he kept as a foolish, desperate form of life insurance. Cole didn't take the ledger. He simply left the cash box open on the desk, the ledger placed neatly on top, a silent testament to the violation. Then he melted back into the night. The confrontation happened the next evening. Cole didn't need to seek the sheriff out. The lawman, having discovered his sanctuary breached and his secrets exposed, was a man on the verge of a complete breakdown. Cole found him in a dark alley behind the saloon, vomiting cheap whiskey into the dust. "You have a weak stomach for a lawman, Miller," Cole's voice said, a low rumble from the shadows. The sheriff spun around, his hand fumbling for his pistol, his eyes wide with terror. He saw the tall, silent figure, and whatever drunken courage he had evaporated. "What do you want?" Miller whimpered. "I was in your office last night," Cole said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "That's a very detailed little book you keep. I imagine the U.S. Marshal and Prescott would find it fascinating reading." The sheriff collapsed against the wall, his face ashen. "He'll kill me," he breathed, speaking of Jacoby. "If he knows I talked to you, he'll kill me." "He'll kill you anyway, sooner or later," Cole countered. "Men like Jacoby don't like loose ends. I'm offering you a chance to die in your bed instead of in a ditch." He stepped out of the shadows, his face a hard and readable mask. "You have a choice. You can die tonight, and I'll make sure that ledger gets to the right people. Or you can live, and you can start working for me. You will become my eyes and ears inside his little kingdom. You'll tell me about his plans, his shipments, the comings and goings of his men." It was not an offer of freedom. It was an exchange of one master for another, a far more terrifying one. The sheriff, a coward at his core, made the only choice a coward could. He nodded, his body shaking with a mixture of terror and a strange, pathetic relief. "I'll do it," he stammered. "Just don't kill me." Cole looked at the broken man, a symbol of the law now turned into his personal and willing agent. He had not fired a single shot, but he had just struck the most significant blow of his war. He had captured the law. The first card in Jacoby's carefully stacked deck had just fallen. The change in Sheriff Miller was immediate and obvious. He became jumpy and withdrawn. He drank more, but his interactions with the blackjackers became clipped and nervous. He was a man haunted, and the entire town noticed. The subtle shift in the power dynamic, the scent of fear coming from the law itself, was the first crack of light in the long, dark night of Mesa Verde's oppression. Hope, a dangerous and long dormant emotion, began to stir in the most unlikely of places. Cole, nursing a wound in his shoulder from the firefight at the mine, knew he needed a safe place to recover. His quiet war had taken a physical toll. He went to the one man he had seen display a shred of courage, Dr. Alistair. He appeared at the doctor's back door late one night, a silent ghost bleeding through his dusty shirt. Dr. Alistair, without a word, ushered him in. As he cleaned and stitched the wound on his kitchen table, the two men had their first real conversation. The doctor was a man of quiet intelligence, his questions gentle but probing. "A man doesn't fight like you for a simple grudge, Mr. Walker," the doctor said as he tied off a bandage. "This is more than just about your brother, isn't it?" In the quiet sanctuary of the doctor's home, surrounded by the scent of antiseptic and the quiet ticking of a grandfather clock, a piece of the wall around Cole's heart crumbled. He found himself speaking of a past he had buried for years. He spoke of a life in Texas, of a wife and a young daughter, of a fire that had not been an accident, and of the outlaws he had hunted in a blind, bloody rage afterward. He spoke of the emptiness that had driven him to a life of silent wandering. "I am not a good man, Doc," Cole confessed, his voice a low, raw whisper. "I'm just a man who has run out of things to lose. A man who fights for others, who protects the weak, has not run out of everything," the doctor countered gently. "You have given this town something it lost long ago, a reason to believe things can be different." The doctor's clinic became Cole's unofficial headquarters, a safe house where he could heal and plan. The old liveryman, Jed, became another silent partner. He would leave food and supplies for Cole in an empty stall, and would forget to mention the quiet strangers' comings and goings to the blackjackers who questioned him. He was a man of few words, but his loyalty was as solid as the iron he forged. The most critical piece of the new alliance came from the heart of the enemy's den. Maria, the saloon girl, had been watching. She had seen Cole's quiet courage, she had seen the fear in the eyes of the men who had tormented her for years, and she had made a choice. She began to feed him information. A whispered word as she served him a drink. A note, hastily scrawled on a napkin, left under his empty glass. She told him of Jacoby's growing paranoia, of the arguments between the gang members. And she gave him the most crucial piece of intelligence yet. Jacoby is nervous, her last note read. He's sent for his best man, the gunfighter, Reno. He's coming in on the evening stage. Jacoby thinks he's the final card to play. He calls him his ace in the hole. Cole's quiet, personal war was escalating. He was no longer a solitary ghost. He was the reluctant center of a nascent rebellion, a fragile network of decent people who had decided to make a stand. His quest to find his brother had transformed into something larger, more complicated. He now had more to fight for. And with the news of the deadly gunfighter Reno's impending arrival, he knew, with a cold certainty, that he now had much, much more to lose. The arrival of Reno was not like the blustering, arrogant presence of the other blackjackers. He stepped off the evening stagecoach not as an outlaw, but as a gentleman. He wore a tailored black coat, a clean white shirt, and a string tie. His face was handsome, his movements were precise, and his eyes held a calm, chilling intelligence. He was a snake in a suit, and his very presence seemed to suck the warmth out of the twilight air. Cole watched him from the shadows of a nearby alley, a grim understanding settling in his gut. This was not a brute like Vance. This was not a coward like Sheriff Miller. This was a professional. This was Cole's dark reflection, a man who had honed the same deadly skills but had put them in the service of evil. Maria's warning had been an understatement. This man was Jacoby's ace, and he had just been dealt into the game. The cat-and-mouse game between the two men began almost immediately. Reno was not a man to sit and wait. He spent his first day in Mesa Verde not in the saloon, but walking the town, his sharp eyes missing nothing. He was a hunter assessing the terrain. He noted the new, defiant set of the doctor's jaw, the sullen silence of the liveryman, the way Maria would no longer flinch when a blackjacker spoke to her. He could feel the change in the town's atmosphere, and he knew it all led back to one man. Reno's strategy was simple and direct. He knew a man like Cole, a ghost who fought from the shadows, could not be easily trapped. So, he decided to call him out. He let it be known throughout the town, in a voice loud enough for all the gossips to hear, that he was looking for the man who scared the sheriff. He cleaned and polished his matched set of Colt revolvers in the saloon's front window. He was a duelist, a master of the high noon showdown, and he was trying to force Cole to play his game. Cole refused the bait. To face a man like Reno in a street duel was suicide, a flashy game of speed and luck he had no intention of playing. His war was one of tactics and certainty, not of ego and chance. The tension in the town stretched to a breaking point. The two silent predators circled each other, their unseen conflict holding the entire community in a state of suspended animation. The confrontation finally came, not in a sun-drenched street, but in the heart of a raging dust storm. The desert, as if sensing the impending clash, unleashed its full fury. A massive haboob, a towering wall of red dust and wind, descended upon Mesa Verde, plunging the town into a suffocating, blood-red twilight. Visibility dropped to near zero. The world became a maelstrom of howling wind and stinging sand. This was Cole's element, chaos. He knew Reno would be looking for him, using the storm as cover. So, he decided to hunt the hunter. Using the knowledge of the town's layout he had gleaned from his allies, he moved through the blinding dust, a true phantom. The storm was his shield, the howling wind his accomplice. The battle was a disorienting, terrifying affair of shadows and silhouettes. It was a fight of instinct and sound. A figure would emerge from the red fog, a gun would roar, and the figure would vanish again. Cole, with his wartime experience, was a master of this kind of combat. He used the town as a weapon. He would topple a rain barrel to create a sound to his left, then fire from the right. He used the confusing echoes of the buildings to make his single gun sound like three. He finally cornered Reno in the wide, open space of the abandoned livery stable, where the wind screamed through the broken slats in the walls. The two men faced each other, their forms little more than dark shapes in the swirling red dust. "You're good," Reno's voice hissed, a sound that was half admiration, half serpent's threat. "But you're still just one man." "That's all it takes," Cole's voice rumbled back. The gunfight that followed was a masterpiece of speed and skill. Muzzle flashes were the only true source of light, brief, violent stars in the red gloom. Both men were incredibly fast, their shots impossibly accurate. But Reno was a duelist, a man used to a static, honorable fight. Cole was a soldier, a survivor. He did not stand and trade shots. He moved. He used cover. He made himself an impossible target. The duel ended not with a single, dramatic shot, but with a piece of brutal, tactical ingenuity. As Reno reloaded, Cole used the opportunity to kick the main support beam for the hayloft above. The rotting wood splintered, and a ton of old, dry hay cascaded down, burying Reno in a disorienting, choking wave. Before the gunslinger could recover, Cole was on him. The fight ended not with a bullet, but with the butt of Cole's Remington, a vicious, efficient blow that left the great Reno unconscious in a pile of hay. Cole did not kill him. A living, defeated legend was a more powerful symbol than a dead one. He dragged the unconscious gunslinger out and left him, stripped of his prized Colts, in the middle of the main street just as the storm began to subside. He had faced Jacoby's ace, and had not only won but had done so with a contemptuous ease that was a profound and utter humiliation for the gang. The sight of their legendary gunfighter, Reno, lying beaten and disarmed in the mud of the main street was the final, breaking blow for the blackjackers' morale. Jacoby's power, built on a foundation of fear and an illusion of invincibility, was now revealed to be a hollow shell. His men began to desert him, slipping out of town in the dead of night, no longer willing to die for a losing cause. Jacoby, now trapped in his saloon with only his most loyal or most terrified thugs, became a cornered, rabid animal. His careful, strategic mind, clouded by rage and fear, gave way to a desperate, cruel impulse. If he could not defeat the ghost, he would force him out into the open. He would take the one thing the ghost had shown he was willing to fight for, the town's soul. His men stormed out of the saloon and seized their hostage. They did not take a man who could fight back, like the blacksmith. They did not take a figure of authority. They took the town's heart. They took Dr. Alistair. They dragged the protesting doctor into the Gilded Spade, his medical bag scattering its contents across the dusty street. The message was clear and brutal. Jacoby barricaded himself and his last half-dozen men inside the saloon, with the doctor as his human shield. A crude, hand-scrawled sign was nailed to the saloon swinging doors. The ghost surrenders in the square at dawn, or the doctor dies. The news spread through the town like a poison. The community, which had just begun to feel the first stirrings of hope, was plunged back into despair. They had put their faith in a phantom, and now that faith was going to get a good man killed. Cole, watching from a hidden rooftop, felt a weight of responsibility he had not felt in years. This was his fault. His quiet, personal war had escalated, and now an innocent man, the first man to show him kindness in this town, was going to pay the price. The ghost could no longer hide in the shadows. He had to step into the light. Surrender was not an option. Jacoby was a man without honor. He would kill them both. A rescue was the only path. This was the ultimate test for Cole and his fragile alliance. He met with the doctor's staunchest allies in the dead of night, in the back room of the now fortified livery stable. There was the blacksmith Jed, his massive hands clenched into fists of helpless rage. There was Maria, her face pale but her eyes filled with a fierce, defiant fire. And there was Sheriff Miller, a sweating, trembling wreck, dragged there by Jed. "This is a fortress," the blacksmith growled. 6 men, all armed, with a hostage. "We can't get in." "Then we make them come out," Cole said, his voice a low, commanding presence in the small room. He looked at the sheriff. "Miller, you told me Jacoby has a hidden escape tunnel from his office to the old Assy building. Is that true?" The sheriff, terrified, nodded. "Yes, for emergencies." "This is an emergency," Cole said. A plan, desperate and dangerous, began to form in his mind. He was no longer a lone ghost. He was now a field commander, leading a small, desperate army of civilians against a fortified position. The siege of the Gilded Spade was about to begin. The stakes were no longer just justice or vengeance. They were the life of a good man, the ransom of a town's soul. The hours before dawn were a blur of tense, whispered preparations. Cole Walker, the solitary ghost, had become the reluctant commander of a civilian army. His plan was a classic military gambit, adapted to the crude tools of a desperate town: a feint, a breach, and a direct assault. The feint was Jed the blacksmith's responsibility. Armed with a barrel of highly flammable coal oil from his forge and a handful of other brave townsfolk, he crept toward the buildings on the opposite side of the street from the Gilded Spade. His target was an old, abandoned warehouse that Jacoby used to store stolen goods. The breach was up to the sheriff. Miller, his face the color of wet ash, was given a simple, terrifying task. He was to walk to the front of the saloon, call out to Jacoby, and create a diversion, drawing the attention of the men inside to the front of the building. His life depended on his performance. The assault was Cole's. He would use the hidden tunnel, the one that ran from the old assy office to the back of Jacoby's private office inside the saloon. It was a one-man infiltration, a desperate roll of the dice. At the darkest hour, just before the first hint of morning light, the siege began. A brilliant orange flower of flame suddenly blossomed as Jed and his men set the warehouse ablaze. The fire roared to life, a massive, crackling bonfire that illuminated the entire street in a flickering, hellish light. Shouts and panic cries erupted from the saloon. As the blackjacker's attention was drawn to the fire, Sheriff Miller, his heart pounding, began his performance. He stumbled into the middle of the street, waving a bottle, pretending to be drunk and hysterical. "Jacoby, for God's almighty, the whole town's burnin'. We gotta get out," he screamed, his voice a convincing mixture of real and feigned terror. The diversion worked perfectly. Inside the saloon, the remaining thugs rushed to the front windows, their attention fixed on the fire and the babbling sheriff. This was the moment Cole had been waiting for. He slipped into the assy office and, using a crowbar, pried open the loose floorboards that concealed the tunnel entrance. The tunnel was a dark, claustrophobic, cobweb-filled nightmare, but he moved through it with a silent, deadly purpose. He emerged through a hidden trapdoor behind the large, ornate desk in Jacoby's office. The room was empty. He could hear the shouts and confusion from the main saloon room. He was inside the fortress. He moved to the office door, his Remington a cold, steady weight in his hand. He could see them through the crack in the door. 5 men, their backs to him, firing through the front windows at imaginary threats in the street. And in the center of the room, tied to a chair, was Dr. Alistair. Standing behind him, using him as a human shield, was Blackjack Jacoby himself, a pistol pressed to the doctor's head. Cole kicked the door open. "Jacoby," he roared, his voice a thunderclap of command. The 5 thugs spun around, their faces a mask of shocked surprise. They were caught in a perfect crossfire they never anticipated. Cole's Remington roared. He was not a duelist, he was a soldier. He fired not at the men, but at the massive, crystal chandelier hanging above their heads. A single, well-placed shot shattered the chain. The huge fixture of glass and iron crashed down, scattering the men and filling the air with the sound of 1,000 shattering crystals. In the chaos, Cole moved. The fight was a brutal, close-quarters affair. He was 1 man against 5, but they were disoriented, and he was a whirlwind of controlled violence. He used the overturned tables and the bar for cover, his shots precise and deadly. From the outside, the blacksmith and the other townsfolk, hearing the fight, opened fire through the saloon windows, adding to the chaos and pinning the remaining blackjackers down. It was over in less than a minute. The thugs lay dead or dying. The saloon was a wreck of shattered glass and splintered wood. Only Jacoby remained, his arm wrapped around Dr. Alistair's neck, the pistol still pressed to his temple. He began to back away toward the escape tunnel in his office, dragging the doctor with him. "It's over, Walker," he screamed, his voice strained with panic. "I get away, or the doctor dies." But a new figure appeared in the shattered doorway of Jacoby's office. It was Reno, the deadly gunslinger Cole had left defeated but alive. His arm was in a sling, his face was a mask of cold fury, but in his good hand, he held one of his prized Colts. He had been left behind by his fleeing boss. "He's not going anywhere, Jacoby," Reno said, his voice a low, deadly hiss. His loyalty had been to the money and the power, both of which were now gone. All that was left was a professional's pride. "You made a fool of me. No one makes a fool of me." Jacoby stared at his former bodyguard, his escape route cut off, his last hope turning against him. In that moment of shocked hesitation, Dr. Alistair, in a final, desperate act of courage, stomped down hard on Jacoby's instep. Jacoby grunted in pain, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was all the opening Cole needed. His Remington fired one last time. The shot was perfect. It took Jacoby in the head, ending his reign of terror in a single, final, convulsive flash. The silence that fell in the gilded spade was heavy and profound, broken only by the crackle of the now dying fire across the street and the ragged breathing of the survivors. Jacoby lay dead. His game was shattered. Mesa Verde was free. Dr. Alistair was safe, and the townspeople, led by a soot-stained blacksmith, began to emerge from the shadows, their faces a mixture of awe, shock, and a dawning, unbelievable relief. They looked at Cole as a savior, a hero. But Cole felt neither of those things. He felt only the vast, hollow emptiness of a task completed. Reno, the gunslinger, gave a slow, single nod of professional respect toward Cole. "The house is clean," he said, his debt of honor seemingly paid. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the saloon, disappearing into the pre-dawn gloom, a man with his own path to follow. Cole knew his own time in Mesa Verde was at an end. He was a ghost, and ghosts cannot stay when the sun comes up. He helped the doctor to his feet. "It's over, Doctor," Alistair said, his voice choked with emotion. "Not yet," Cole replied, his gaze distant. "There's one more thing." He needed the final answer. He needed to know what had truly happened to his brother. The doctor, having treated some of the wounded blackjackers before they died, had the final piece of the puzzle. It had been pieced together from the delirious, dying confessions of the men who had been at the Spectre mine. Ethan Walker had not been killed in a simple argument. He had discovered the true nature of Jacoby's operation. The Spectre mine was not just a failing silver claim, it was a front for a massive smuggling operation. Jacoby was using the mine's tunnels, which connected to an older, forgotten network, to smuggle stolen army rifles across the border to Apache renegades, a hugely profitable and treasonous enterprise. Ethan, a former soldier himself, was going to expose him. Jacoby couldn't just kill him. He needed to know who else Ethan had told. He had taken him to the mine to torture him for information. But Ethan, brave and stubborn to the end, had refused to talk. There had been a fight, and in the struggle, Ethan had been killed. The final piece was Jacoby's escape plan. He and Reno, had they escaped the saloon, were to take a final, massive shipment of rifles and their accumulated wealth and flee on a special and scheduled train from the old, abandoned train station south of town. The train was meant to be their passage to a new life. Cole now knew what he had to do. This wasn't just about vengeance anymore. It was about honor. It was about stopping that final shipment of guns from falling into the wrong hands and starting a new war on the border. He left the cleanup of the saloon to the townspeople. He asked the doctor for one last thing, the location of the abandoned station. Then, he walked to the livery, saddled his horse, and rode out of the town he had just liberated, a solitary figure heading south into the graying dawn. He was going to keep his brother's last appointment. The abandoned station was a skeletal ruin under a high, cold moon. The wind whistled through the broken windows of the depot, a mournful, lonely sound. The tracks were rusted, the water tower a leaning, black silhouette. It was a place of endings. The train was there, a single locomotive and 3 cars, steam hissing quietly in the cold air. The final confrontation was set. Though Jacoby was dead, his plan was still in motion. The train's engineer and fireman, loyal to Jacoby's money, were preparing to depart. And guarding the train, the last 2 loyal members of the Blackjackers stood watch. Cole did not go in guns blazing. He was a ghost, and this was a haunting. He used the shadows, the skeletal remains of old rail cars, the very silence of the place, as his weapons. The showdown was a tense, atmospheric masterpiece of stealth and tension. He picked off the 2 guards silently, to quiet thuds in the night. He then confronted the engineer and fireman. They were not gunfighters, they were hired hands. Faced with the silent, deadly specter who had single-handedly destroyed their boss, they surrendered without a fight. The climax was not a noisy gun battle, but an act of quiet, final justice. Cole found the crates of stolen army rifles. He found Jacoby's chests of blood money. He did not take them. He systematically, and with a cold, grim purpose, destroyed them. He smashed the rifles, and he poured coal oil over the money and the train, setting it all ablaze. He stood back and watched the train burn, a massive, roaring funeral pyre under the desert moon. It was a pyre for his brother, for his own past, for the violence that had consumed this small corner of the world. The fire at the old train station could be seen for miles, brilliant, defiant star in the desert night. For the people of Mesa Verde, it was a symbol, a final, cleansing fire that consumed the last remnants of Jacoby's corrupt empire. Cole Walker did not stay to watch it burn to embers. His work was done. He had found the truth of his brother's death. He had brought a brutal but necessary justice to a town that had forgotten the meaning of the word. And he had honored his brother's final and spoken duty by destroying the smuggled guns. He rode back toward Mesa Verde, but he did not enter it. He stopped on the same high ridge where he had first looked down on the town, a quiet, anonymous drifter. He saw the lights of the town, no longer just the harsh glare of the saloon, but the warm, flickering lights of homes where people were no longer afraid. He had given them back their town. He had a final meeting. Dr. Alistair, as they had arranged, was waiting for him at the edge of town, near the small cemetery. "It's done," Cole said, his voice a low rumble in the quiet night. "The town owes you a debt it can never repay," the doctor said, his voice thick with gratitude. "They want you to stay. They want to thank you, to make you a hero." Cole shook his head, a slow, sad gesture. "I'm no hero, Doc. I'm just a man who ran out of road. A ghost? And ghosts can't stay when the sun comes up." He gave the doctor the last piece of information he had, the location in the Badlands where Vance had confessed Ethan was buried. "Give him a proper burial," Cole said, his voice cracking with the first hint of emotion he had shown. "Bring him home." He turned his horse to leave. "Where will you go?" the doctor asked. Cole looked out at the vast, dark expanse of the desert, a landscape that had been his only true home for years. "The trail goes on," he said simply. "There are always more ghosts to outrun." He rode away, not into the sunrise, but into the deep, star-dusted darkness, disappearing as quietly as he had arrived. The next morning, the people of Mesa Verde found their town transformed. The gilded spade was being cleaned out, its gaudy sign taken down. The sheriff's office had a new, temporary lawman, appointed by the doctor until a proper one could be found. There was a sense of purpose, of community, of a future that was now theirs to build. Of their savior, the quiet man named Cole, there was no sign. He had left no name, no legend, only a profound and lasting change. The final scene of the story reinforces the theme. Weeks later, Dr. Alistair and the blacksmith, Jed, stand over a new grave in the town's small cemetery. A simple wooden cross reads, "Ethan Walker, brother." The town has brought him home. They stand in silence, a silence that is no longer filled with fear, but with a quiet, respectful memory. Cole Walker's quiet, solitary actions had created a loud and lasting peace. The silence he had brought was not the silence of fear, but the silence of a new beginning. And in the newly freed town of Mesa Verde, that silence was the loudest, most beautiful sound of all.